All right. First, have people heard of Jim Thorpe? Maybe. Okay, yeah. He was one of the premier all-round athletes of the first half of the previous century. And he won 2 gold medals in 1912 in the pentathlon and the decathlon. And that was as an amateur athlete. But those gold medals were taken away in 1913 when I found out he worked and played for a semi-pro baseball team for $2 a game. That's $67 today. In 09 and 10. So he lost his amateur status and he lost his gold medals. So some things have changed since then. A lot. And so we have college athletes that are openly paid by schools to play. We have some that switch schools so they can get paid more. And so the question is, how did this happen? And so that's why we have Professor Greg Dooley here. He's from the University of Michigan, and he will give us the background history and give us a sense of where we are now, and also hopefully shed a light on maybe where we're headed. So he teaches 3 courses: college athletics history, leadership by coaching, and NIL. That's name, image, and likeness. He is a graduate of U of M and University of Indiana, and he has previously worked in the information technology area. And then in the last 20 years, he's been chronicling college football history on places such as mvictors.com, the Big Ten Network, New York Times, and also on radio. And he can be heard regularly on the podcast, The Professor and the Pundit. So please welcome with me Professor Greg Dooley.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you very much. I was asked by the Dean of the School of Education to create a class on name, image, likeness because, like you, so many people were interested in it, including donors and other people. They said, Dean, why don't we have a class on this? So they asked me to do it. I also teach the history of college athletics and a leadership class that's grounded in athletics. These are fun classes for the students. They're all electives, okay? But I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. And as mentioned, the world has really changed. And the first part is with NIL. And here's Shedeur Sanders. If you follow the NFL draft, he made a few headlines. And the idea is that someone in college with fame and with an identity and with a brand, legendary, can make money or be endorsed by brands like Nike. That's name, image, likeness. The other part that's happening right now are a series of lawsuits leading up to something called the House settlement. And that's another thing that's going to change athletics. And I'm going to walk through that. But before we get there, I do want to walk up a timeline through history. And I'd ask you to look at a few things. First of all, the more things change, the more they stay the same. History may not repeat itself, but I assure you it rhymes. And I'm going to tell you a few stories from the early days of college athletics, one of which I considered, by the way, was the Jim Thorpe story because it's very important. But we are going to talk about the Olympics because it's very important. I want to talk about the rise and fall of this entity that is the NCAA and the rise of rights like people like Shedeur Sanders to make money in college, okay? And then finally, yes, I'm going to get into what next. This is a tangled web, people, and we're going to leave some time for questions, okay? I do not have all the answers. I have some hopes and I have some ideas, but I do not have the answers, but we'll get into that. Hopefully, you'll leave here a little bit entertained. This is what I try to do with my students. A little bit informed, right? And maybe take home some new questions and share some of this with your friends. That's what I try to do in my classes, okay? So I do want to start way before Jim Thorpe in 1852 in the first ever college intercollegiate event is Harvard and Yale. It's a regatta, it's a rowing race, but it was not held at Harvard or Yale. It was held on a lake upstate in New Hampshire, okay? A lake pretty far away from these two schools. Okay, why? Well, it was organized by a person who had interest in the railroad, People needed to get on his railroad to go see this event. It was organized by a person who owned lakefront property on Lake Winnipesaukee up here. So he wanted to get people there. The other thing, the players were actually paid and compensated in the first event. And on top of all that, some of the rowers in this competition, this regatta, weren't actually students at either school. That's how we started out, people, okay? So let's get that. All right, 1869, the first football game is between Rutgers and Princeton. Does anyone know who won this game? Rutgers won. Yes, Rutgers won. Sadly, this is the last significant win Rutgers has ever had. Okay, sorry. All right. But football spreads rapidly. It spreads to the west, the mid part of the country. We call it the west at the time, not east, right? And there's some shenanigans going on. Yes. Oh, I know Michigan holds itself in high regard, but I assure you things were happening, okay? So 1894, the guy who manages the football team says 7 of the 11 players for the University of Michigan football team weren't students. But no one asked. If no one asks, what's the problem, right? So Harper's Weekly, periodical from the time, well respected. This is what the elite people read. An article comes out about football in the West, and it says men are bought and sold like cattle. And the person who wrote this, a guy named Casper Whitney, he's not wrong. So fast forward to 1896, we have a letter from the Bentley Historical Library between a prospective player, a guy named Dutch Ferbert, and that same gentleman, Charles Baird. And in it, it says, to send you to college, I'm going to give you a loan. Well, that sounds reasonable enough, a loan, right? But he adds, there must be absolute secrecy about this matter. We should make no chance of this leaking out. Well, what's going on here exactly, right? We must keep our mouths shut. And he says, return this letter. Why do you think he want that letter returned? Anybody? So I'm not showing it to you guys 150 some odd years later. Okay, so another letter. We talk about contracts today and terms and agents and all this stuff. Here's another player. This is in the Michigan Athletic Archives. Terms, 9 installments of payments. He must attend college regularly, conduct himself in a more moral manner if he wants this money. And of course, this player needs to help us win. All right. So, 1902, Pasadena, California. My first Rose Bowl, I've been to 5. My first was in 1988. Who played in the 1988 Rose Bowl? Michigan State fans, anybody? They sure did, and they won. It was an awesome experience. But back in 1902, Pasadena was a burgeoning town. It's beautiful. Anyone's ever been to the Rose Bowl knows. It's just a beautiful experience. But people didn't know about it. So they wanted to get people out to California to see their beautiful, this is like one of the old classic LA towns. And to do that, they organized a group, not the South Haven Speaker Series, but a group called the Tournament of Roses. And the idea was to bring people out and to attract them. And in 1902, they said, let's try this game of football. And that's why the Rose Bowl is known as the granddaddy of them all. It's the first postseason recognized bowl game of any kind, right? This predates the NFL. Mentioned Jim Thorpe earlier. He was the first president of the NFL as well, but that wasn't until 20 years later. All right, so they have the Rose Bowl. The star of that Rose Bowl is a guy named Neil Snow. I'm guessing most of you haven't heard of him. He scores 5 touchdowns, though, in the first Rose Bowl, and he plays other sports at Michigan. So when he comes home, he is the big man on campus. Mr. I scored 5 Rose Bowls. He happens to be captain of the baseball team. He also plays guitar and apparently loves to drink a lot of beer. How do we know this? Well, in his last home game against Cornell in June, the game program comes out with an advertisement from the Coppets Melchers Brewing Company claiming that, there he is, who, Snow, when, since childhood, any place it's sold, why? To make me strong, what? Their Pale Select beer. There's a problem, though. He didn't know about it. They used, his fame to sell their beer in a game program. They bought an ad, used his picture. He wrote them. He said, hey, we're not supposed to be drinking beer. I live in Ann Arbor. It's not cool. How about you send me some beer and we'll call it good? And they do. They send him a case of beer. So, from 1902, we have a case. They use his name, his image, his likeness. They quoted him. They have his consent. We have the letters. We have a contract. It's a contract. And we have compensation. Granted, it was a case of beer. Okay. So this has been going on. Fast forward to 1906. Something really, really bad is happening on the football field. Young men are dying, not just in college athletics, but also in high schools and everywhere else. The game is absolutely brutal. And some of you know this guy. This is Teddy Roosevelt. And he gets involved when he gets the Eastern schools to the White House and says, hey, players are dropping dead, even at my school at Harvard. What are we going to do about this? And the reforms that they created at that time led to passing the football. You couldn't pass the football up to then. It made the game safer because it opened up the field a little bit for players to play. And eventually, it helped solve the problem of all these players being maimed, injured horribly on the football field. Didn't completely get rid of it, but it helped. But why do I bring this up? Because this group and this meeting was really the spark that led to what would become the NCAA. All right. Now, when we talk about the NCAA, does anyone have a homeowners, a condo association, a homeowners association, or anything like this? Anybody here? I do. Not crazy about it. But it was created by my peers and us, and it serves at behest of the people in the community or the condo or whatever, right? That's what I kind of like in the NCAA. So the NCAA is going to take a brutal beating here tonight, okay, from me. But I want you to remember something. The NCAA is Michigan. It's Michigan State. It's Grand Valley. It's the presidents of these universities. Those are the people. It's not an amorphous blob that exists somewhere out in Indianapolis and does all these dumb things. It actually serves for the schools, and they run the bylaws. So I'm going to point the finger at the NCAA, and I do think there's a lot of problems with the structure of it, but it is our schools. That's what it is. Okay, so let's move ahead. We have, after the passing game opens up, this is when you see a lot of schools build these giant stadiums. You start to see a lot of money involved. This is when the NFL comes online. But we enter the Great Depression. Teams still want to win. They still want to win football games. And in particular, a lot of schools, including Michigan, are running a scheme that looks like this. You have a big donor base. For Michigan, it was in Chicago. And what they would do is fund the local companies, give them money, the lumber yard, right, other places in town, and tell the recruits, hey, come to Michigan, we got a job for you. You come to Michigan, we got a nice job, right? And the players would go, okay, it sounds pretty good, coach, right? Wink, wink, we got a job. And they just show up and just get paid by these local businesses. So effectively like a slush fund, if you will. They're funding the local businesses. The athletes on a promise are getting paid, and they're really just there to play football. This was happening in the 30s. We know this at Michigan because this is one of the reasons one of the coaches at Michigan got fired in the 30s. This whole scheme was exposed. It wasn't just Michigan. There were a lot of schools doing stuff like this. Okay, fast forward to the 50s, something really, really big happens, and that is the U.S. homes that own a television goes from almost nobody in the early part of the decade to just about everybody. The only thing I can liken it to in my lifetime is the rise of cell phones. Some people had beepers, then someone had a cell phone or maybe had a car phone. Then suddenly, years later, everyone has a phone, right? So that went on. This is important because this is when the NCAA suddenly had a product. They had a product that they could control and sell, and they realized it very early. Now, a lot of schools were afraid to be on TV at first because they thought it would take away from people actually going to the games. Why would you go to Spartan Stadium if you could simply watch the game on TV? So, but they had a product, and they did start to sell it, okay, in the beginning. But they were very smart, and they had a leader in the NCAA who said, wait a minute. Now that we're kind of feeling like a business, are we protected legally if something like back in 1906 when all those players were dropping dead, are we protected? Is this all going to collapse? And they came up with the term student athlete. Student athlete. Volunteer student, volunteer athlete, not our problem. Not our problem if something bad happens. We didn't tell, they're there, we're putting them on TV. How they got there, it's a mystery. Okay? So they lawyered up and they figured this out. And sure enough, a guy named Ray Dennison in the 1950s, he's back, he's on the GI Bill like a lot of people back then. He gets in a big collision and dies on the football field. Well, Ray's a little older, he was on the GI Bill, he has a widow and kids. And this phrase, student athlete, was used to defend against providing compensation to Mrs. Dennison. And I like to tell my class, she didn't get nothing, she got a big rock or a stone. So here's to you, Mrs. Dennison, and your poor kids, okay? All right, so what else? TV. From the early days, there were a couple teams that tried to stray. One of them was Notre Dame. Yes, and the other one who really, really tried to stray was the University of Pennsylvania, Penn. They actually went off and tried to sign their own contract. But the NCAA squashed that, okay? And they controlled the price, the schedule, and which teams were shown and when. And they really restricted it, okay? But they really, really controlled all the money, and the money started to grow. There's some Michigan State fans here. A lot of things happened in the 1970s that caused a rise. You saw big events in the 60s with UCLA, other big games. We started to have integration. The quality of the sport started to rise. And viewership and the value of the TV money in the major sports really, really started to rise. So now we got power. 1984, right around this time, the TV contract comes up for bid. And the NCAA controls it. A group of schools had already got together, basically formed a union, locked arms, and said, hey, NBC, shh, hey, you want to show our football games on TV? And they did. They quietly negotiated their own contract with NBC. How do you think the NCAA felt about this? They absolutely lost their mind. Okay, they absolutely lost their mind. They threatened probation, this is football, but they said you can't play in our basketball. Remember the big basketball tournament? You can't play in that. Maybe we'll kick you out of this altogether. Okay. So the NCAA gets together, and they get their lawyers together, and they say, I can't do that. And this is a case where the NCAA sued. They said, hey, this is ours. You can't touch it. And their argument was, look, our TV policy that's restricted and we kind of control the money, it's good for everyone. And, you know, it keeps your ticket sales and everything. It fills Michigan Stadium, right? It keeps everyone all happy. That was their argument. Well, this went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the NCAA lost 7-2 in the Supreme Court. And they called them you're going to talk about economics here in a couple weeks, I suppose, or months, I don't know. They called them one of the nastiest words that you can call someone in American business, and that is a cartel. That you are a cartel. Yes, like diamonds, oil, drug lords, okay? That's what you are. Why? You're controlling and limiting the supply, you're controlling the price, and above all, anyone who tries to stray from this arrangement gets punished. Okay? You're a cartel. This is really, really important. I try to stress this to my students because the big financial numbers that are all being thrown around right now all kind of come back to this moment when the NCAA lost it and lost control. And this allowed schools like Notre Dame and the conferences to go out and start negotiating their own TV contracts and led to the big escalation. They lost their grip thanks to the Supreme Court. All right, there you go. $1 billion a year deal with the Big Ten coming up. There's lots of words of the SEC and the Big Ten kind of cozying up together to maybe negotiate another contract. We'll see. All right. So something else happens in 1986, and I love the Jim Thorpe. It was about this time that the Olympics decided to reinstate Jim Thorpe's medals. Of course, he's long gone. It was in the 80s. And they said, sorry, you took $5 or $2 for a baseball game. We were wrong. and they gave it back. But they basically, up to that point, you were ineligible to compete in the Olympics if you had been compensated. But this is 1986. They changed. The Olympics changed in 1986 and said, okay, each federation can decide what it wants to do. And that's when the Olympics realized that not allowing these athletes who were making tons of money being on TV, everyone remembers Lake Placid and how great that was, that they should be able to earn money and earn endorsements. And there's a vivid case, right, with the Olympics, and I think it's really important. It's a great question, but again, this is 1986, right? This is quite a while ago. The Olympics understood it. Up to this point, the NCAA hasn't budged on any of its athletes. Fast forward to 2002. All right, here's Jeremy Bloom. This is a vivid example. He is a mogul skier. He's a world champion, Olympian. You know, he does the moguls and all that. He also wants to play football at Colorado while he's training. He happens to be a punt returner, kick returner, but he's made endorsements because he can as an Olympian, and it helps fund his travel and all that. And the NCAA would not budge. They said, no, you're ineligible. You can't do that. That's not how we work. So it was kind of a vivid contrast between two entities that had this idealism of amateurism kind of hitting each other at the same time. This is 2002. All right, 2009. Case for younger people here, but you know, the EA Sports, this is a player, Ed O'Bannon, he's a UCLA player. The NCAA is selling the rights to use its teams in video games and other properties. And Ed O'Bannon was a former player of UCLA. He sees this player, okay, African-American, left-handed, number 31, UCLA, kind of looks like me, doesn't it? That's me. They're using me. They're selling it. They're selling it. And, of course, this goes to the courts. This time, the NCAA, they gather its lawyers again. It says, hey, but if we pay these guys, it's going to harm competition. And it's not, and it's not good. What about the education? And it's not good for athletes. You know, it's just not good for them. And once again, you know, this goes to the courts. And initially, they rule in O'Bannon's favor. But this really started to change public opinion about this whole notion. Okay, 2021, guy named Sean Alston from West Virginia. He says, okay, I get my scholarship, you feed me, you pay for my books, but it's clear that I am worth way more to you, to my university, right? It's clear I'm worth more. This goes to the courts, all right? And the NCAA, and I want you to hear this one because I always laugh when I tell my students this one. Their argument is, you can't take this, they're arguing to the Supreme Court. You can't take this away from us. You can't make us pay because not paying them, that is our business. That's our charm. We don't pay them. People love it. You know, if you take that away, we don't have a product anymore. Supreme Court, yes, this Supreme Court, 9-0 against the NCAA, 9-0. I'm sure you're very well read. The strongest opinion was from Judge Kavanaugh, who mocked the NCAA's argument of arguing that, you know, your business model. Where in America can you get away with saying our business is not paying players? And the last thing he says is, the NCAA is not above the law. And this signals all lawyers all over the country and other states, and now blood's in the water. And they're in trouble now. And they get back together, and they go, all right, we got to do something. And this is when, coming out of that Alston case, that they decided, all right, you can't pay them, but they can go out and get endorsements. They can cash in on their fame. And that's what NIL brought, okay? So that's when they basically said, you can have a Shedeur Sanders go out and make money off his name. And this just happened a few years ago. This is all very, very new. But, and the other thing that happened, this is important too, is that while you have these pure NIL deals like Nike, something else popped up. And the term that they call them is collectives. And you've probably heard of collectives. Has anyone donated to a collective? Okay, I have. Collectives. What are collectives? Collectives said, okay, we can pay them for their fame. And they all kind of gathered, and all these alums and donors and fans gathered in each of these colleges, around these college communities, and said, well, who's to say how much putting a hat on or holding a can of a drink is, or merely saying you support some aspect of something that's going around in our town? Who's to say it's not worth $500,000 to put on a hat? Okay, so what they did was they pooled donor money, and they've basically funneled it to student athletes. They're third-party companies. They're not affiliated with the schools. The schools weren't paying. It came out of these other entities, right? And they absolutely were skirting the spirit of NIL, and are, by the way, to this day, to this moment, someone's getting an NIL deal. And they called them NIL opportunities. And I kid you not, it could be, we'll pay you simply to endorse our collective. This is the big one at Michigan. Put on a Champion Circle hat. You're part of our company. Here's some money. Okay, that's what they're doing right now. All right. So, remember this scheme in the 30s? You got powerful alumni funding local companies, making promises and paying athletes? Well, change the business to a collective. Put a modern donor up here funding the collective. Put a modern coach here and put an athlete here. There's Bryce Underwood, if you know. That's the same thing. It's the same scheme that they were running in the 30s is what's happening with collectives today. Okay, it's the same model. We're going to pool money. We know we're not, this isn't a real job. This isn't a real NIL opportunity, and that's what they're doing today. So, a lot of things have happened. The transfer portal, the ability to move from one school to a next has changed. And suddenly, the most fancy parking lot at Michigan used to be in the Ross Business School, and then at Michigan Medicine with all the executives who work for the hospital, okay, and the chief doctors and everything. Well, that's now been supplanted by the parking lot at Schembechler Hall, okay, where the players park, and it's very fancy. And suddenly, in a very, very, very short amount of time, the power has shifted away from the NCAA directly to college athletes, all right? They can leave whenever they want. They can demand money. They can apparently sit out before spring games and demand more money. They can transfer at any time. They've got agents and parents and family members and fans in their ears telling them they're worth more. Okay, and they can do something about it, and it's absolutely driving coaches and athletic directors nuts right now. Okay, all right, 2024, there's one more thing. Of course, all this is going on, and players are watching this, and a lot of former players are going, well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait a minute, that was pretty cool. This is a guy named Grant House. This is a guy, he's a swimmer at Arizona State University. He said, wait a minute, what about me? What about me? You know, kind of happening. Arizona State has a good swim program. I could have made some money. And at that point, you know, he's kind of got a point. He could have. He didn't have these rules. So then it was about the amount. What's the amount? And that's a scary proposition. And so our lawyers gathered again at the NCAA, and they said, wait a minute, how many players, how many sports, how many billions of dollars will be sunk if we don't do something about it? So they gathered, and they realized the jig was up. They have to settle, and we got to pay these former athletes, all these millions of dollars that we're generating from sports. We're going to have to settle with these guys. So they agreed to it. All of that money, here's Michigan's locker room. the new locker room. There's one of the stalls for one of my students, Colston Loveland, who's going to play for the Bears. Not bad. There's the barber shop. There's the 2 bowling lanes in the football building. It's got a golf simulator. I didn't show it to you. All right? Guess what? Where a lot of those players who were just drafted are going, they don't have facilities like this because they had free labor. They had very, very cheap labor to fund all this stuff that Coach Harbaugh wanted before he left. And so the jig is up. So the back pay, and that led to what we call the house settlement. And the house settlement starts with this back pay. Someone like Joe Burrow, who plays for Cincinnati Bengals right now, great quarterback at LSU, could make about $1 million in back pay. And they settled on a number of about $2.8 billion to be paid out over 10 years. And it will be funded by future NCAA tournament distributions that go to the conferences or teams, right? They have some insurance that covered some of this. They have some reserves of cash. And they came up with a formula to say a football player versus, say, a softball player, what you'll get in this equation. Okay. But they knew something else. That's back pay. And it goes back to 2016. There's probably lawyers in the room. There's a statute of limitations. Okay. They knew they couldn't stop there. The two sides knew they couldn't stop on just paying backwards. And that's where this next piece comes in. And this is new. And this will be new. The house settlement isn't approved yet. But this is revenue sharing. This, up to around $20 million, each Power 4 school can distribute to its athletes. They did not give a formula, and they gave no guidance on Title IX. Not going to talk too much about Title IX. And it'll increase over time. But now the schools, for the first time in about 175 years, can actually directly pay its athletes, assuming the house settlement will be approved here in a week or two. Okay. The other thing it did, it changed roster limits. Last year, in a lot of big football teams, you could have anywhere between 120 and 140 guys roaming around the football building. They're reducing it to 105. Okay. They also made, I'm using football as an example, they made roster changes, but they said you can give everyone an athletics scholarship. Okay. That's the other thing they did. The judge presiding over this case happened to be the same judge who presided over the O'Bannon case with the video game and other really important cases, has said, I don't like this because you're taking away opportunities for athletes if you reduce rosters like football. You're affecting thousands of athletes. So that's holding up the settlement right now. The other thing, they're going to put some kind of enforcement group together. They hired the company Deloitte, right? The big accounting firm, former accounting firm, consulting firm. And they want to get rid of that whole idea of being able to put on a hat and make $500,000 in a fake NIL deal. They want to create a clearinghouse and an oversight group to root that out so that deals are actually authentic deals. Good luck. Good luck. Okay. All right. So athletic departments said, hey, we got to start thinking about acting like a business, not like, no offense, a bureaucratic organization that fills stadiums and makes a lot of money. We got to start thinking about a lot of things. What are we here to do? What's important? A lot of them are looking to the NFL on the football side and hiring former general managers or people with cap experience, cap space. They're looking at transfers like free agents if you follow the NFL. They're actually evaluating players like NFL and coming up with a value for them and saying, here's our budget. These are all things. The busiest person after the head coach in the football building right now is the general manager. The same thing on the basketball court. All right? So Alan Hauer, Michigan State's athletic director. You've got Spartans here. I follow this stuff very much. My family's former, absolutely. So you look, I happen to follow a lot of sports. Michigan has 29 varsity sports. I have a lot of those athletes. I've kind of started following. Michigan State's had a lot of success in a lot of their sports lately. Their gymnastics team, their basketball team, I think, is on the rise. He's made some good hires. The hockey team. Okay, here's a little inside pool. I have lots of Michigan hockey players who've taken my classes. They love Michigan State's coach. They love that coach, Nightingale. He's made some really good hires. I know the Mel Tucker stuff. He lost his job by all accounts. Now, you guys can argue with me about this, as State fans, but it seems like State was too far behind with a lot of the business side of NIL. A lot of the bigger donors were feeling alienated. I know Mel Tucker had something to do with that. But he lost his job despite, I think, success in a lot of areas where you would check, 5 years ago an athletic director for. Okay, so there's mounting pressure. How do we fund this? All right, how do we fund the $20 million, all the extra scholarships that could be in play? Do we get loans? Do we get private equity investments in schools? Should the schools, Michigan's athletic department, like a lot, are self-funded up to this point. They fill the big house, they get the TV money, and they fund all their operations themselves. Are they going to start pulling money from the school? Michigan has a $20 billion endowment, a AAA bond rating. Are they going to get a loan? Okay. Do you cut or prioritize Western Michigan down the road? I think they're prioritizing one of their sports. Does anyone knows what that is? Have you heard about this new facility that's coming in? So Eastern Michigan, kind of a little more quietly, actually got not $10 million, but close, a donation. And the donor started with a conversation about, I want to make an impact in the athletic department. How do we do it? And they did research and looked at it. They picked golf. And they have a fund to bring in players. They made facility upgrades to the nice course out there. They built indoor stuff. I don't know if they put a bowling alley in. Okay. But they're trying to build a NCAA golf program up north, okay? Where do the smaller sports? Michigan has 29 sports. You don't hear about a lot of them. Where do they fit in? Where do smaller schools fit in? Where does Northwestern and Purdue, no offense to any Purdue people, fit in with Ohio State and Penn State, okay? We expect more lawsuits because people have an argument here. Who's to say there should be a cap on what I'm worth? We could see that. There's rumors of, one thing that President Trump's been really good at is signing those executive orders and taking his picture. There's rumor of a Trump executive order providing some type of protection to the NCAA, antitrust or otherwise. There's rumors of, hey, there's momentum for maybe these should be considered employees at this point, okay? What ifs? I got some questions for you. What if the TV streaming contracts have peaked? I have 2 kids. They don't watch full games. They're in college. They can't sit and watch 3 hours of a game. I'm sorry, they just don't. Maybe they will when they're older. Okay, they watch TikTok and stuff like that. I'm just throwing it out there. Okay, sports are really hot right now. What if the fans are turned off? What if the big schools start to demand more? You're starting to see that in the ACC, where Florida State and Clemson wanted more in the new contract and got it. Michigan and Ohio State, they make a lot of money for the Big Ten. Are they going to go, hey, we want more? We split it all today. And then do we risk, I asked this question, do we risk throwing it all away because we're trying to protect or solve basketball, men's basketball, and football? By the way, Michigan's hockey team, very iconic program, tons of national championships, loses money. Phil Yost loses money, loses almost $1 million a year. At best, breaks even. Okay, so somebody mentioned Larry Bird and Michigan State earlier, and when I say I worry about throwing it all away, because I do see the rise of some other sports and some other things going on right now. And I bring this up, that the first organized men's postseason tournament was in 1938. And if you watch NCAA basketball, we're never going to stop talking about Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, ever, okay? And it really started in 1979 in that game in Salt Lake City, in that huge matchup. It had everything, including giant TV ratings. And that moment was 1979. That was exactly 41 years. And people argue that also launched the NBA into orbit and led to future players, Michael Jordan, et cetera, who carried it on. Well, the first NCAA tournament for women was in 1982, first organized NCAA tournament. You might remember they met twice, but the first time that really had this special moment between these two, Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, was 2023. Happens to be exactly 41 years. So time, opportunity, and exposure matter. So I worry that we're throwing some of that we might be throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. Okay, so sports matter. I think you guys realize that. Maybe it's not as important as some of the other topics you have in here. But my hope is we tread carefully. It's a huge part of our culture. It's a huge part of our sense of community. It's fun to beat heads with Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, Notre Dame, and other schools in this area, right? It really does build a sense of community. And you guys know, it's been on the front lines of social change in all kinds of directions. A lot of these issues have played out through sports. So I think it's really important. We are at a critical junction here. And I hope you left here informed, entertained.
Can you talk about the unionization at Northwestern and how that blended into all of this?
Yeah, and I'll try to be brief, but a group of athletes at Northwestern organized, attempted to try union, and this happens elsewhere. This happened at Dartmouth as well, where they tried to say, we have rights, we have the rights to bargain, and the NLRB, for the most part, has looked at this favorably, and ultimately the National Labor Relations Board can dictate whether you are employees or not. They actually stopped at Northwestern because they're a private school, and they looked at our other homeowners association, which is the Big Ten, and said, this is a bunch of public schools, back then it was, before USC, and said, we're not comfortable putting down a ruling. But they didn't go, at Dartmouth, they said, yeah, you meet the litmus test for employees. They've since backed off, okay? But I do think it brings up a bigger question. The athletes have power. They have a lot of power. They haven't even used all of it. What if Notre Dame and Ohio State didn't come out for halftime of the national championship game? What if teams didn't come out on the floor? What if teams refused to participate in players and teams? So they have power. They could organize. Northwestern was one of the first that got together and said, hey, we should try this. No one's made real deep traction on that yet, but it was important.
I listened to your podcast, and in the House case, you were talking about how the judge is against reducing the roster spots, and something about the SEC doesn't want to reduce, so then they don't have to play women's sports, or schools are going to choose teams that they don't pay for, eliminate them.
Well,
Ohio State got rid of gymnastics. Could you speak about that?
Yeah, it's really a curious case. So there is a question of like what sports remain and what happens. Okay, the SEC to this point has said if we go to a 105-person roster, we're going to keep our scholarships where they are at 85. Okay, what that means is they've decided, and scholarships are expensive. It's not millions of dollars. It's not new cars, but it is new cars. It's money, right? It could be $100,000 4 years, right, or more. As I know, I have a daughter in New York City in college and a son at Indiana. It's expensive. It's a whole other. This whole system. We got to have a conversation. Maybe I'll come back in 2 years and talk about it. So they've said we're not going to do it, but it gets back to all these athletic departments. They got together and said this is our stance. The Big Ten hasn't really said anything yet, but what they did was, okay, this is coming. We need to keep some limits on how we're going to fund this because some of the schools probably squealed, and you can't. For now they want Vanderbilt. And they want some of the smaller schools. And they said, look, how are we going to pay for this? So I think they got together and said, okay, we love baseball, we love gymnastics, we love football in the SEC. How can we make this work? And I think the football team said, we can make up the money other ways. Okay, I think that's what they're going at. They love women's basketball. So I think it was a budgetary decision. It was a surprise. The SEC, of all people, is saying, we're not going to fork up for our football programs. Surprised a lot of people, including me. We haven't heard from the Big Ten. As soon as this case comes down, which I expect it to soon, it'll be really interesting to hear what the commissioner of the Big Ten, because I assume they're going to do something similar and give guidance to the schools. Okay, but remember, the schools are all different. You have some schools with 20 sports in the Big Ten and some with in the 30s. Okay, so, all right.
First, a quick story. I know a person for sure that told me that in the 80s, a high school kid was being courted by a college. He was taken out for dinner on his visit to the campus, and when he went back to his hotel room, his king-size bed was covered with $100 bills. And they said, "This is yours if you choose to come here." I have this for a fact.
Okay.
Regardless.
I hope that happens at the bed and breakfast I'm staying at when I go back there tonight.
No, we're going to cover it with dollar bills.
Okay, sounds
Best
good.
we can do.
Okay.
My question is, my memory is not good, and it feels to me like it wasn't that long ago that there were discussions about getting some money for college athletes so that because they have to work so much, they can't get summer jobs, blah, 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 they deserve to get, I don't know, enough money to be able to go on a date once in a while or go do something, maybe $100, $200 a month. And that was being highly debated and was put off. Eventually, is the NIL legal decision a real thing that pushed all of this discussion from $100 a month to, in some cases, millions of dollars a year?
Yes, the Alston case is what did it. The other thing that happened is they approved some of that type of money, around $6,000, if you were good in school and stuck around. And the schools actually called it Alston money, where a field hockey player can make an extra $6,000. It came out of that case. But the big thing was that blood in the water and the lawsuits and the NIL and the big, opportunities for a lot of people. By the way, there are like lesser known athletes who have managed to work social media very well and make a lot of money and build their brand.
What's going on at the service academies?
What's going on at the service academies? I've heard, now they've not gotten involved with any of this so far, okay? But I thought I heard they were thinking about changing that. And this might have to go off camera. There's a rumor, not a rumor, that's a horrible the current general manager for the Michigan football team is a guy named Sean McGee, and he used to work for the Chicago Bears. He went to Navy. He served. The word is they're talking about him for their athletic director position. Why would you want this person? He's wonderful. Like, he's amazing. But I think part of the selling point is maybe the service academies are going to move toward getting more involved in this. If you know the history of the service academies, they've had iconic teams, especially around war times, and so maybe they're going to play. Maybe they're going to play in this space moving forward. We'll see. Yeah.
Okay, I wanted your thoughts on something I've always tried to reconcile as an attorney. The difference in the gap I find between the transfer portal and the NIL money. For most normal Americans who are employed, you get something, the NIL money, and then there's usually some terms, some boundaries that are associated with it. I can't say in the middle of the game, hey, I'm leaving Michigan, going to University of Miami. That's currently happening right now.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about that? I feel that it's been too loosey-goosey.
Yeah.
If you were a normal American adult working somewhere, no, there's contract terms you have to abide by, and it seems like the ball was dropped. There's no connection at all.
It's pretty rough, and again, it's that pendulum swing went way too far. Something does need to be done about it. I could do 45 minutes on this. I'm not. I think you come to a school, you should be really required to stay there at least 2 years, and there should be a penalty or a waiting period if you don't, for starters. Okay. We also need. Thank you. Thank you. Maybe I'm going to be Navy's athlete. Okay. The other thing is we need more transparency on the agents, and they should have agents. They should have legal representation. What we have laws that say they're supposed to be registered somewhere or something, but there's really no way to register, and there's no transparency into this database if there was one. It's horrible. A little more transparency about who these actors are, these people who are going around. Some are NFL pro agents. Some are, hey, I want to represent you. I've never done it before, and everything in between. So yeah, it's a little crazy.
Are they looking at the pro model, meaning, let's say football? The lady talked about free agency or whatever, but even the conferences. Why is the West Coast going to the East Coast? I think at some point they will look like the NFL.
Yeah.
And it'll be regional.
Yeah.
And they'll have a Super Bowl, and they won't call it that.
Okay.
But because the travel is ridiculous.
UCLA didn't want to come to the. In their heart of hearts, you think they wanted to join the Big Ten and leave the Pac? No.
And
they had to.
Yeah.
They had to.
Well, the Pac-12 was not making any money.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they were losing a lot of money.
Because of the time change. How about commissioners for sports?
I do think there's probably a logical step where the big sports break off and are still affiliated with the school somehow, and there's a commissioner. The NCAA guys blew it. They had all kinds. What they should have looked at is the Olympics, and they said, wait a minute, the Olympics is changing, but they're greedy. The school presidents and the NCAA are greedy. They're addicted to money, and we could build a bowling alley in our football building. Hey, this is great. And we can do all these things, and it's good for the student athletes because we can have all these sports now. It was wrong. Yeah, well, let's talk about that. That money was funded by private donors. So wait a minute. Now, no one's knocking Cooper Flagg, but what about the other guys? They weren't good enough. So my money wasn't good enough. And hey, I know we got it wrong that time, but we got a good plan this year. Can you come again? I don't know. And they call that donor fatigue, right? Some of it happened at Michigan State after Mel Tucker. What are we doing here? So what am I paying for? Listen, a lot of these people, maybe some of them are dumb, but most of them are pretty smart. Somehow they sleep each night on a bed with a lot of money on it, and they've decided to give some of that to their school. But when it doesn't work out, they get frustrated.
Do these tidal waves of money ever wash down to the ordinary students, not athletes, scrounging to pay their tuition to get an education at these big universities? Does it ever happen?
Not really. There are more opportunities for young people, though, in this ecosystem than there were ever before to support athletes at social media. I don't have to tell you that younger people have a better eye for the tools and the way they communicate in TikTok and Instagram and all this, where a lot of this plays out and a lot of the deals. So there's more opportunities, but trickling down and waterfall, I don't see it.
Just because it's a great anecdote, maybe a question here. In the 1960s, late 60s, I was in high school. My sister was at the University of Michigan and written up in Sports Illustrated, actually. The class was a astronomy class taken by...
Doc Loesch?
Yep. Taken by Bill Button, Cassie Russell.
Okay.
Those guys. And my sister reported that it's A for athlete, B for boy, C for co-ed. My sister obviously was a co-ed.
How did she do?
Well, she's an interesting character, and so she actually got a B.
Okay.
But she befriends everyone. So is that kind of thing, maybe you know, is that, I mean, that's a notorious thing.
So the funny thing is, I teach at Michigan, but I really don't know yet a lot of the faculty. Like if there's meetings, I'm not invited to them yet. I'll tell you, if you're taking my class, you need to do the work if you want to pass the class. And there have been outcomes that are lower than the C and lower than a D, if you want to say that, for people who have taken my classes. And I can only speak to myself. So I don't do general person C's for people. If they don't do the work, they don't pass. So are there classes where teachers go, hey, you didn't turn anything in. I'll give you this final week to finish everything you didn't do, but they do that for everybody. Yes, those classes exist. I don't do that. I don't have a care package at the end of the semester. Okay, the Little Brown Jug is the oldest rivalry trophy. It predates Paul Bunyan and all that stuff, right? It's 1903. Actually was stolen from Michigan's campus in 1931. It disappeared. A jug appeared. A freshly painted jug appeared at a gas station in Ann Arbor. The teams played for it 2 years. And then magically, the original jug, what we believe is, actually appeared on campus. Here's the last thing. This is how nerdy I am. Anyone familiar with Greenfield Village and the Henry Ford Museum? So I talked to the art department at Michigan. I studied the current jug. And they said, well, you know who really knows a lot about these jugs is a guy named Ryan who works at the Henry Ford Museum. He makes, in Greenfield Village, they make the pottery, the stoneware pots that they made from the era. Actually got him into Schembecker Hall with the jug to look at it, to kind of time date it and stamp and figure out if it was still the original jug, and he concluded that he thought it was. So that's the lengths I go through, people. Pray for my wife tonight. That's what she has to deal with. Thank you very much. All right.